folks, to today's edition of SCOOTR Chop Shop, Scooter News, SCOOTR Kitchen, whatever you want to call it today. Today we're talking about chain drive on these scooters powered by an Eton 41.5cc 2.2 horsepower engine. This is the shaft out completely. The sprocket would be mounted on your shaft like that. You may have a snap ring in that groove if you have a rocker, Cobra, or Nuke, or Dynamite 3, or similar model to this here. If you don't have the drive shaft that's threaded on both ends, if it's only threaded on the one end like this, then this is the video that would apply to the installation of chain drive for your scooter. With the snap ring off and the sprocket removed, and all the bearings in it unloaded from a scooter. This is another shaft. Basically, when you go back together and the shaft is up in the body with a sprocket on it and a bearing on it, and your wave washer behind that bearing on these particular models, then when you're all the way back to this side, you have a bearing there, and then a snap ring that holds that bearing in place behind that pulley. Well, that doesn't really keep the shaft from spinning inside the bearing. You see I'm holding the inner bearing race there, and the shaft is turning. What that can cause is the bearing or the shaft to wear down smaller and smaller where the bearing rides, and it gets loose and it just tears everything up. You want to make sure you've got good tight bearings at all times on these shafts. But basically the factory setup with a bearing on, now this one didn't want to go on, in the body with snap ring on, you'd want to keep that shaft from ever being able to spin inside that race. So what we have is type 1 spacer available at SCOOTR COM. That's www.SCOOTR.com, or by calling 256-468-2761. So back to the spacer here. With your snap ring already installed, you can put your spacer on, and then whether you have the 2-piece pulley or the 1-piece pulley, put your keyway in and your pulley on, and then your nut. And then the pressure of all that being sandwiched will make sure that the inner race turns with the shaft and that the bearing is operating as it's supposed to, not damaging your shaft. So let's jump back to this other shaft here a minute. I guess we're on spacers. This is for a Razor, SCOOTR, Libra, Rockville, the red one. It's 30 thousandths shorter, the spacer for it. But on either model, you do have the option of going with a 345 thousandth spacer, which is designed for 2 bearings. Now, there are models that do not have a snap ring holding this bearing in. If not, if you don't have a snap ring that holds that in on your model, on a drive shaft that is threaded on both ends, you can go ahead and put 2 bearings if your frame is the same diameter all the way through. Some of these frames are a wider diameter at the entrance to the frame cavity. Let's go ahead and pull this apart here. At the entrance to that frame cavity, they're a bigger diameter than the bearing, but right where the bearing rides, they do fit the bearing. If that's the case, that it's not the same diameter all the way through, putting 2 bearings in does you no good, and you should stick with just a single spacer. Like, let's pretend this was a SCOOTR or a Razor or a Libra or a Rockville or a THS. Then you just want to put type 2 spacer in there in your pulley and forget about it, unless your frame is the same diameter all the way through. Then if your frame is the same diameter, you can put 2 bearings and a type 3 spacer, and then your pulley, and then you've got double strength on this side to keep that from tearing up your shaft or doing damage. So the way we're intend to do this one is with the shaft back in and the snap ring fully installed, we're thinking about putting one of the short spacers in there. Since this Rock or Cobra frame is the same diameter all the way through, with the short type 3 spacer, we're going to put a bearing on the outside of it. There will be a snap ring there, and then our pulley and so forth. So that's the way we're going to put this one back together, was with a type 3, which you don't have to do. It's $10 for these spacers each, and it's another $10 for a bearing. So if you wanted to go the double bearing,